You're listening to the Classic Gamers Guild podcast.
This makes my nipples hard.
Hello and welcome to the Classic Gamers Guild podcast, now on video. We thought we would start our inaugural video episode talking about something that I'm not even initially talking about something that I thought was really, really important to gameplay and my enjoyment of games, and that's the plot. But the more Paul and I have kind of been discussing it, the more we've been is it as important as we thought? And when is it important? And when isn't it important? And it just gave us so much to talk about that we decided to share it with all of you. Hey, Paul.
Hey. Yeah, hopefully we didn't talk hopefully we didn't get all the juice out of this off air in Messenger, and there's still interesting realizations to be had about this. But I think the idea came from when we were talking about King's Quest recently, because I was like, most people seem to prefer 6 to 5. Without this time, we're not going to get into the whole King's Quest thing again. I've already issued several public apologies. My simple point here is just that, when people are saying why they like a game better than another game, they rarely say anything about the plot at all. Because it dawned on me that I like the plot of King's Quest V better than the plot of 6, but it's the plot almost doesn't seem to matter so much with adventure games, or it's not as important as you would think. And that's so yeah.
That was the realization that hit me today, as I'm and an adventure game is kind of all about its environment. So it's you're on a boat, you're in a castle, and then it's environment and fetch quest with some plot kind of trying to weave everything through. And I guess as games got more complex, plots would get more complex, and maybe that thread would be thicker and longer, but still that the environments would get more detailed, and there'd be more to the game. So it's really hard to see where that balance is of just enough plot to hold it together compared with an amazing plot. And I think even if you just stick within Sierra as a company, they've got they've run the gamut of all of that, from practically no plot and fetch quests because they're just figuring it out with King's Quest 1 to say Gabriel Knight 2, or even 1 where your plot is really complicated and there's a lot going, and you have environments to explore, and you have gameplay. So I think it's a really interesting topic.
Yeah, I do too. I guess as a disclaimer off the bat, I would say we're kind of going to be dealing with plots as far as a complex plot and a thin plot, or maybe a nicer way to say thin would be straightforward. But just to get it out of the way, a thin plot isn't necessarily a critique. It's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of games with pretty thin plots that are amazing, and that you wouldn't even probably stop to realize that the plot is kind of thin without breaking it down, which is I guess in a sense maybe the birth of this episode idea, which is realizing that there's some pretty thin plots out there that pass for amazing games, and thus bringing into to question how much does a plot matter in an adventure game. Because as you were just saying, a lot of it is not only it's split between environment and then just circumstance. Adventure games seem to go from one circumstance to or scenario to the other, usually I guess in the form of a puzzle. But it's it's rarely the overarching story. It's rarely the fact that I'm so bad with King's Quest 6. It's rarely about the fact that your potential love is being trapped in a castle by an evil whatever.
Mordak, yeah.
Right, thank you. So much as it is about the little worlds that you're traveling to, and the adventure along the way, man. That's usually what's more important in an adventure game. So it's just it's interesting to see what they get away with. So I guess to get us started, I was looking at the 2 Phantasmagoria games as just a model to highlight to the audience what the fuck we're talking about, in the sense of Phantasmagoria 1 I would say is extremely straightforward plot, on the thinner side, where it's ultimately it's just a haunted house story, where they purchase a house and a magician used to live there, and there's some I don't know about if I should say, supernatural events unfold, or something, some generic statement like that, because it's basically, more about like Adrienne's experience in the mansion, and unraveling of its history and things like that, as she's just walking along, again, kind of circumstance to circumstance. Things are sort of unfolding, but like the overarching plot, if you were to read the back of the box or just a summary, it's more just like, hey, a young couple buys a house, and there's some weird hexy, cursy stuff going on because of the previous owner. It's a haunted house story, and it's kind of as simple as that. And then you look at Phantasmagoria 2, and
Hmm.
that game just like, just it has a lot of dimensions. It deals with all kinds of more intricacies, more, I don't know, everything from like hallucinations to psychological trauma, and yeah, it's I'm not wording it super great, but I
Well, no,
mean,
it's true. Like, okay, a lot of the plot in Phantasmagoria 1 is like it's not even plot. It's like little pieces of a story, like an undercurrent, like who's taken over Dawn, what's his backstory? How does Adrian escape? What's her story? Because it's like every single person in Phantasmagoria 1 has their own story, but there's no like big, like super convoluted, lots of storyline, lots of different plot arcs. It's literally just these little elements combined up into tiny little mini games, almost like find your way through, figure out this scenario because it's timed, go over here, pick up this, you need this to go get that. So it's like it's pretty thinly strung together in that one.
yeah, it would be the perfect example if it wasn't for the fact that 2 is better than 1.
It's
Not even
true.
objectively, because I
No.
think ultimately the point that we're going to hopefully navigate towards is that it really doesn't matter, that thin
Mm-mm.
plots can be, as far as a gaming experience, can be just as good, if not better, than complex plots. So the only fault in this kind of like example that's getting us started is that 2 is a lot better. But I guess it
Mm-hmm.
kind of goes to show like the gameplay experience is there's no way I can really manipulate this into making 1 sound at all on par with 2. So I probably should bail on that. But to your point, it's like we don't know anything about Don. Like, he doesn't have
That's
character
exactly
development at
right. I
all,
was going to
right?
say you don't care about the only person you care about backstory is the magician, the phantom that ends up haunting Dawn, because you're like, who is that guy? Who is Adrian? Who's the gardener? Who's the lady with the blonde hair that is in the garage? I mean, we don't care anything about any of them, but like immediately in the second one, who's this guy? Why is he living as an apartment loan? Let's learn about his job. Let's learn about his coworkers. Like it gives you that curiosity about what's going on, what's his situation, where's he going, what's the story behind his business, how did he get into the position that he's in, how does he run his programs. It's got like more depth to it in the second one for sure.
Right. And well, that's a good way to look at it. Is if you look at Adrian versus Curtis, in a sense, it's
Hmm.
like Adrian's backstory is newlywed, is an author.
Yes.
And
It's
then yeah,
exactly
that's
it.
that's kind of it. And then, but with
Hmm.
Curtis, it's like we look into his entire psyche, his troubled past, the complex relationships with coworkers, and it all intertwines into like these real world events that are happening at work. And yeah, so I guess it just kind of highlights the difference of what we're talking about how a game can have even a thin plot or a complex one. So now it makes me want to kind of jump to the defense of straightforward or thin plots, just to bring some balance. And I would say, as a throwaway, because both Anna and I aren't really fans of Myst, but I know
Hmm.
a lot of people are, and Myst is a great standout example of a game with virtually no plot, where it's
Hmm.
just like it's as Anna brilliantly brought to our attention at the beginning of the episode, and well, my attention in Messenger a few hours ago, but it's so much more location based. Like the
Hmm.
location is what's interesting. It really
Hmm.
isn't, and Myst is the perfect example of how the location can trump the plot of a game and maintain your interest, like just solely based on exploring the environment as opposed to plot.
Hmm. It's true. And especially in like it's hard, like it's been a little hard for me to consider Myst an adventure game. To me, I've always kind of called it an environmental game because I never like, and maybe it's because I never played it all the way through, but I'm like, where's the adventure? Like there's mystery and there's intrigue and there's what do I do next? But like what is the adventure part?
Yeah, and honestly, that'll probably be an episode that we try and tackle in the future. Is because that's the opposite end of the spectrum of, like, we've been speaking back to Messenger, which is, I know, super interesting for people to hear about private conversations, but just we've been toying with the future episode idea of what makes an adventure game, because frankly I think a lot of people look at games where the character goes on an adventure, and then calls it an adventure game, and it's like, hold on, like Uncharted, and our dear friend Joshua Cleveland, who runs Adventure Game Hotspot Network. Hi, Josh, and who loves that game. Maybe we should bring him on and just fight about it with him. I think that'd be fun, because I just want to be
That
like,
would be good.
dude, just because the character's going on an adventure in the game doesn't make it an
Mhm.
adventure game. Which is such a
Mhm.
nerdy, pedantic sentence I just said, but it's true. I mean, it's like, and there was a Twitter account with the name Adventure in it, and they cover adventure things, but they don't like adventure games, so they're just like, Uncharted is a great adventure game, and then the video they attached to their thing was an action sequence. It was a real time
Mhm.
event sequence. Like, that's it's just an adventurous thing that's happening, but it's not an adventure game. Anyway, I guess that the point is that that'll be a future episode. Maybe we could bring some friends on to fight about it. Um,
Mhm.
but back to the plot thing. So yeah, you look at Myst, and you say, like, okay, you don't need a plot to, okay, all right. To kind of play along with what you were just saying, where it's hard to even consider Myst an adventure game, because I agree. To me, it's almost a combination of logic puzzles and first person perspective that just like rips me away. Myst is closer to like Gone Home, which is an adventure game, kind of. Also, it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's almost like
Mhm.
it's almost like escape rooms, except for, there's a little bit more plot than you're trapped in a room, and you can move from room to room. But
Mhm.
okay, we're getting farther and farther away from it. So let me bring up Monkey Island. Because at its core, it's a pretty straightforward story. It's like
Mhm.
Monkey Island One is, well, Monkey Island One is King's Quest One and Two together in a game, because
That's a
it's
good way to put
basically
it.
because it's like the first half of Monkey Island One is King's Quest One, where you have to collect three things or get, um, make, yeah, basically, let's just keep it simple as that. You collect three things, and then the second half of it is, um, rescue your love, which
Yeah,
which in
do
Monkey
your
Island, it's
trials.
yeah. So like, yeah, King's Quest One in the first half is the trials, and then the second half is, and while yes, Elaine more or less rescues herself slash you, as opposed to you rescuing her, it's still this general idea is, get to the top of the castle and rescue the thing. So, um,
Mhm.
it's not super complex of an actual plot, but that doesn't mean that the things that are happening in Monkey Island aren't, doesn't mean it's without moments of complexity or anything like that. It's just to say, like, hey, at the end of the day, the plot for arguably the goat of adventure games is pretty straightforward. Can
Mhm.
complete the trials, rescue the girl slash end up getting rescued yourself.
And then, yeah, become a mighty pirate and eventually try to figure out the secret. And yeah, and it's like the adventure in that game lies in the little moments. Is like you've got your overarching over the series, although some of them go slightly out of canon, but we can talk about that later. But yeah, it's treasure lies in those tiny moments when you're at Scumbar and you're just trying to figure out what the pirates want and how to communicate. So like tiny, tiny, mini stories that wouldn't even be a chapter in a book. They'd be like a page story. And it's like a bunch of those kind of clipped together, and your overarching story is the book that they're in. So you've got like a book with
Mm,
30 pages, and on the back you can kind of read a summary. There's your like overarching plot, and that's Monkey Island.
right, right, exactly, and it stands again, it's probably largely considered like the goat of adventure games. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess we're just this trying to highlight, how plot doesn't have to be complex, and I guess
Mm-mm.
another kind of 180 flip on this idea would be to look at a game with a really complex plot that is not bad, at all. I'm just picking an example here that I personally enjoyed, but it's not even an enjoyable experience, as I discussed with Geek. So that game would be I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream.
Right.
It's a very complex plot of what's going on. It's dark. It's thought provoking. There's like this omnipotent AI that's torturing the last five humans on Earth, and there's backstory galore between the five humans, between the AI, how we ended up here. It's really quite complex. but that doesn't equal an enjoyable experience. Like I
Hmm.
enjoyed it, I really did, but I could just as easily, if somebody was like, "Oh, that game, I didn't have fun with that," I'd be like, "Fair enough." It's definitely
Hmm.
not a fun game. It's it's like it's a cool or a thought provoking or an interesting experience, but it's like I'd argue that it's not necessarily fun. Um,
Hmm.
or fun would be the wrong word for a positive adjective on it. But I guess the point being here is that like you can be super complex and not necessarily provide an enjoyable experience. And I know it's unfair because it's not a bad game. So I wish I had a more complex example. Can you think of an example of something that was complex maybe to its detriment?
Well, I
Or
mean, we mentioned it briefly earlier, but Planescape Torment, and it is a huge passion game. Like people that love it, love it. They got into it. They got into the lore. They got into like this whole huge world that they can get into, and the gameplay that goes with it. And it's really intense, but it's kind of daunting for somebody like me. They're like, yeah, just be prepared to read volumes and volumes of text and absorb it and understand it and how it relates to other parts of the game. So, to me, that's like I was a little bit overwhelmed. I'm like, wow, it sounds like there's so much story that I'm not even sure I want to play it now.
right, right. No, yeah, that's yeah. Anytime you're bombarded by lore, there's the potential for the I almost wonder if Thimbleweed Park's an example of that for the people that didn't appreciate the ending, let's say, or it's like they could view that as like maybe even trying too hard. But um
Techno Babylon is a good example where there's a lot of lore, and I think that, as we mentioned on our episode about it, the person that wrote it, I think, like, had this whole world created and wanted to present it in a game, not just so that we could play it, but we could kind of understand the reasoning behind how the politics work. And it got a little bit heavier later in the game, and there's a part of me that if I'm tired or if I'm not super focused in, I'm gonna like start missing stuff. I'm gonna click click click. Oh man, I just missed like five clicks of lore. But now that's, and not even that any of it was super important to the gameplay, but to my detriment. If I don't pay attention, I'm missing out on an aspect of the world. But do I even care? And I guess some of that even depends on my emotional state on the day that I'm playing it.
right, right. No, that's fair. That's fair because I mean, while that was a game we both enjoyed greatly, I would say that it does at least introduce like the risk of overcomplicating things to the player or potentially losing somebody's interest due to complexity where it's like they don't have the emotional capacity for it that day, as you said. Like sometimes it's just a mood thing where you know
Mhm.
you just might not. I think we've discussed it on this podcast before as like almost like a LucasArts Sierra thing where it's like if I wanted to just kind of switch my brain off, I'd be more inclined to pick a Lucas game because they're gonna
Mhm.
more like take my hand and be like, let's just go on this light-hearted adventure like Sam and Max and or Day of the
Mhm.
Tentacle even. Well, that one does get a bit more complex, but still, it's like you kind of take your hand, you appreciate the checklist mentality in those senses, and then there's other times where you want the challenge of like Dagger of Amon Ra or something like that. So yeah, it's not even always the game's fault or that the game was done in a good or bad way. I think it can come down to mood.
Yeah, daggers like that too. It can get quite heavy on information, which also is part backstory. Like, for example, later on when you're at the dinner party and you've got to interview every single guest a great number of times and vast volumes of information. Then you end up with your notebook and the notebook's getting filled up, and you're like, oh my God, I got to ask each person about 9 separate things. I missed asking them. I didn't realize there was another page, and I missed asking everybody about this one thing. And it's like, you know, you have to be ready and prepared to absorb that in to truly get something out of the game. Because if you kind of just like click click click, doesn't matter, have I clicked everything I need to do to get to the next phase, and then you don't take any of it in, I'm not even sure it's quite like, it doesn't have the same depth as a gameplay experience. So it's like sometimes there's lore and there's story in there and you're just like, I just don't want to take it. But then you're like, okay, but you're only getting X percentage of the game. Like in a game like Dragon's Age, I know you don't play the RPGs, but I love Dragon Age. It's a great game. It's a beautiful environment. I love that the characters interact with each other and there's all this thread of story, but there's also the lore of the kingdoms and the places you've been and other people and other characters. And like, I don't, I often don't read them. I stick the little parchment papers in their little slot. I make sure to fill all the slots and collect them, but I've never even opened them up. And I don't even know if they would help my gameplay. And I'm probably not immersing myself, but then I feel overwhelmed. If I take in all the lore and I read everything, I'm not going to end up finishing it because I'm like, oh my God, there's so much information right now. I just want to fight a bunch of bad guys and maybe have sex with my tent mate or something, like whatever it is that the game's going to be about. So I don't want to go that deep in, but like RPGs and lore go hand in hand in hand. So I'm like, I guess I'm just getting some of the experience.
Right, right. No, well, I guess that brings to a good conclusive point that a complex plot can, it offers depth and immersion, but it could also overwhelm the player.
Mm-hmm.
And I had in my notes, I had this written down as like it can overwhelm the player if it's not executed well. But I think I would change that to just it can overwhelm the players based on a lot of different facets, whether it's the mood that you're in or what you're looking for in a game or whatever. So it's execution aside, it's like having lots of depth and immersion and everything. It sounds great on paper, but there's plenty of games that are just really straightforward and kind of more bare bones that are just classics. Bloom's probably a pretty good example of that. Space Quest
Good call.
1, Full
Mm-hmm.
Throttle, that's another example where it's just like pretty straightforward storylines.
Yep.
And it doesn't, they're, I guess, serving as a good reminder that you don't have to have, like, I don't know, Lori Cole amounts of lore
Right.
pre-prepared just to embark on telling a story. It
Like
can be great, and a lot of times it is, but it's definitely not necessary.
you wouldn't bring this up, so I'm going to say Quest for Glory 3 was mainly written by Lori. Corey was unavailable doing other projects at the time, and the game is extremely heavy in lore and story. And I think that that's the reason a lot of people go back to that and say, oh, it was such a beautiful game. I really liked this game. And then somebody like me at the time, I'm like, oh man, there was no action for the thief. I couldn't break into stuff. I wanted to see the inside of the houses in town and kind of get more into that side. So it wasn't until I was older and I was like, oh, the lore and the story, I can appreciate it more.
Right. Right.
And
Yes.
but that leading into like um, freedom, right? How much freedom do we want in a game? Are we looking for freedom in a game? Like, okay, Minecraft, ultimate freedom. Build anything you want, anywhere you want. If there's going to be a story to a game like Minecraft, unless you're playing story mode, but if there's going to be a story in free play, it's your story. You're making it up, it's in your head. Same with like in The Sims. There's no real story unless you fall into the town story, but you can make your own story if you have an imagination. And that's another element to plot. How much is your imagination and how much do you want it to be? Like in an adventure game, they're kind of holding your hand and saying, okay, here's the story. I'll take you with it. You don't need to imagine so much because we're going to kind of give it to you. But in like The Sims, which you can do all sorts of stuff, they're like, okay, you can do all the stuff and play the game. But if you want to add your imagination to it, you can also create a story on top of building a house and living your life. But that's up to you. So, okay, me personally, I couldn't get into that. I never made a story in The Sims. I would make a house, I would make a person, I would usually make her just like me. She'd read a lot of books, get really good at cooking, boom, fly off in a rocket ship to space. That's Sims 4, self employed. Great. But like, there's no story like, oh, Janet met Tim, but Tim's really with Rebecca, but I don't like soap operas. So I like it's a personality thing how you would choose to engage in a game with plot freedom.
Right. Okay. Okay. So for this chapter of the discussion, it's like what is a bald ass eagle
Hmm.
just went by. You have to take my
Well,
word for
I believe you.
it. Wow, this is just so majestic. Um,
So
it's hard.
American. As the bald eagle crosses over and we wonder what his plot line is.
And a good day to you, sir. Sorry. This brings us to, I guess, the part of where it's like no plot
Mm-hmm.
is I think what you're kind of what we're touching on now, where it's like the massive open worlds,
Mm-hmm.
where there's basically no plot to what's going on.
How like you play games with Strum in VR and you guys are like monkeys bashing about, like, I'm just making this up, I'm gonna sound so old here, but you're like monkeys bashing about buildings or playing a game. Like, are any of those VR games plot filled? Like, what brings you back to them?
Right. Yeah. No. God, when it comes to VR, it completely depends. As two VR examples would be Gorilla Tag, what you were just referring to, which is just mindless fun. I mean, I would equate that to like a side scroller where it's like you don't fire up a game like that looking for plot, right? So it's almost exempt, I guess, in a sense, because it's like it's not part of the marketing materials. It's just like you're just going in there to be a monkey and to play tag or whatever the case. But then there are other examples where I mean, we played like a haunted cabin game the other night in VR, and that had like a small plot where there's definitely like a child ghost haunting the place, and you have to get 3 items to unlock the attic, and then in the attic you find the ghost, and yeah, it's like a nice little bite-sized story.
Mm-hmm.
It's a story. All right, well, let me reel it in because I'm getting myself confused, which is always bad news for the listeners. I guess looking at the difference between plots, whether there's a straightforward plot, a complex plot, or just no plot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I guess for the sake of moving forward, we could leave anything that's no plot, and that ultimately comes down to. I'm thinking of Red Dead 2, where it's like when you finish the because there's very very complex plot that plays through the whole game, but then once you're done, you're free to just explore,
Mm-hmm.
and there's like side quests and things like that. But probably a good example of something that's fun on both levels. It's fun playing that game underneath the guidance of a plot and a
Yeah.
story. And for people who have played it, like Arthur versus John, I guess you could say, like playing as Arthur, you're going through his arc and playing it as the plot intended, or following a plot. Let's just say I'm saying plot way too much. It's starting to sound weird and meaningless as a word, but and then once that whole story is completed without spoilers, you end up playing as John, and that's more just side quests. It brings back. Never mind. I don't want to get too nerdy about that either. But yeah, I guess the point is I'm gonna get lost really quickly if we go into games without plots, because then I'm losing meaning, losing touch with meaning.
Mm-hmm.
On where to go with the conversation, because
It's
that's
true.
just like a whole nother world of games where it's like the plot, if the plot it doesn't isn't meant to even be there, then
Mm-hmm.
yeah, okay, help me out. I'm drowning.
No, that's okay. I think it was important to cover the fact that, even in a place where that there isn't a plot, you can make one. You just have to work a little bit harder at it. But yes, guiding us back into gently into adventure games. Like it's
It's
not entirely the same. It's kind of like there is a plot or there isn't. Like I'm not going to make up more story on King Graham in King's Quest 1 for him to do his fetch quests. Like
Wait,
I
is,
would
is that why I got so lost? It wasn't because of plots, it was because we just ventured out of adventure games and I started panicking. I'm
well
like,
yeah, and
I don't know
if
what
we
to do
go
out here.
if we go back to our original notes, I believe I said, yes, at this point, when we talk about this type of subject, Paul is just going to sit quietly because he doesn't know anything about it. So
Right.
that's directly in the notes.
And
So
I made
you're
the
okay.
mistake of trying to say stuff. That's what happens. So
You
I'm just like,
did.
I'm saying words and they don't mean anything. Please get me out of here.
But no,
Yeah.
we're back. We've reined it in. I said my thing because I happen to play a lot of different games that are not just adventure games. In fact, my James and I were playing Heroes of Might and Magic 3 last night because our
Nerds.
kid wasn't home. So we're like, what are we gonna do? And he's like, oh, let's play Heroes of Might and Magic 3 together. And I'm like, should we? Yes. And we continued our previous game, which was lovely. And we're, a good 12 hours in and getting pretty ready to kill each other.
It looks horrendous. It does. You
Yeah,
sent me
Paul.
screenshots, and it's just the most unappealing mess I've ever seen in my life. Isometric grids and potions, and just no, thank you.
Yeah, very, very confusing for that. But no, we're back into adventure games now. And I mean, I think we could gently guide ourselves back into enhancing player engagement. So, how does a plot enhance our gaming experience? In an adventure game in particular, because we kind of touched on that a little bit, as in like you preferring King's Quest 5 over King's Quest 6 because you like the storyline of King's Quest 5. Now my question for you is, do you think that King's Quest 6 could be a better game for you if the story was better, or is there something else about King's Quest 5 that made it your personal choice?
Mm. Um, Well, I would say that in I don't know if it's hindsight or retrospect or just in doing a small amount of research behind the things that I say and coming to the realization that both of them have very thin plots.
Hmm.
Like I think in my head I'd built up five, which maybe that's worth exploring in a sense because it's like
Hmm.
what caused me to think higher of five than, or what caused me to think there was more substance than there really was within five. But without going too philosophical on it, just looking at them both where it's like okay, five, the basic summary would be Mordak makes his family disappear and
Hmm.
here's an owl and you guys are going to go get him back. So it's not super complex, and six is more or less the same. It's arguably, yeah, it's arguably maybe more complex, but I think they're both pretty thin because six is like what Alexander's trying to go get, um what's her name, Casima, I think Casima.
Cosima. Yep, you got it. You're right.
He's trying to. Alexander tries to. He goes to the Green Isles to get Casima, and yeah, just a bunch of crazy stuff happens between him showing up and him leaving with the girl. So they're
Hmm.
both pretty thin plots. Um, I I I think I think in this case I'm more invested in King Graham.
Hmm.
I don't really like Alexander. He just seems super just helpless and whiny and yeah, I think a lot of it just came down to that where I just didn't really like Alexander that much.
So the
Um,
protagonist affected how you felt about the whole trajectory of the game.
right, but more so, and that's a great summary. But more so, I think it's back to your point that was a great realization for me, which was the location. I think
Hmm.
it's just like five is just infinitely more interesting to me as far as an adventurous exploration. Like
Hmm.
going through like first of all you have like the small town and all the little characters and shops in the town, but then you're like literally like traversing topography and going through the mountains and encountering yetis, and it felt so much more adventurous
Hmm.
than the Green Isles, and obviously there's the other islands that are attached. But yeah, I think a lot of the King's Quest thing for me was just the location,
Hmm.
but it does bring me back to the original spirit of this episode, which is like, why is plot something that's not really brought up when it comes to adventure gamers talking about adventure games they like? Like you don't really
Hmm.
hear people say I like six more because of the story, because of the overarching
Right.
plot. Like I like the idea of being Alexander and having to go and get Casima, from the tower. I mean, it's really generic. It's almost like King's Quest Six is this is a stretch, but bear with me. It's almost just like a verbose version of King's Quest Two, because ultimately you're just the dude's going to get the girl from a tower. Like that's kind of it's kind of all that's happening in both of those games. Six is just
Hmm.
a much more verbose way of doing that. But neither of them are like the kind of story that's like groundbreaking or at all really unique. I mean, they're quite fairy tale driven stories, classic ones at that. But yeah, it still does, I guess, bring me back to the overall question of how are adventure games oddly exempt from needing a great plot when, and this is the paradox of it, is that they're story driven games. Like the whole point of adventure games is the fact that they're story driven, but the overarching story oddly doesn't seem to matter that much to adventure
Well
gamers.
said. I wonder if, you brought up a really good point about identifying with the character. I wonder if the part of the reason it doesn't even need a story as much is because you are playing as that character. You are exploring and going on whatever adventure he's on. So it's kind of like, I've hopped into your life for a little while. Let's just live it. I don't really care about much more around it in some ways, which is different because if you're reading a book, it's not the same. You have no control over it. You're not just hopping into the protagonist in the same way you do with the game. So I wonder if that's why story is not necessarily quite as important.
That's a great point. That would bring me to bringing up Roger Wilco and Guybrush, because
Yeah.
those are two people you just like want to be and want to spend time as, and
Hmm.
I don't I could immediately just think with Roger, like I'm not super concerned with what all he's like, what trouble he's into this time. I just want to go through it with him,
Hmm.
and of course,
Hijinks.
yeah, yeah. And I'm thinking of all the Space Quest games and like of them, like which ones are the complex ones or which ones are not, and obviously, like I think obviously the farther back you go, the more towards AGI that you go, or EGA that you go,
Mm-hmm.
the more simple it's going to be for reasons beyond just the obvious, like for technical limitations and the fact that the idea of like a narrative computer game in the 80s was so new that it was normal for programmers to just come up with a story real quick. Like I look
Mm-hmm.
back at like the era of Sierra and think of like Jane Jensen, like the fact that it took them until like 91 or 2 to hire a writer to write a game is insane. And it was just normal. It was like, like Ron Gilbert he can whip up like a custom engine over like a weekend. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but he was also like the one of the head writers for Maniac Mansion, because that's just the way it was back then. Like there wasn't dedicated roles for this sort of thing. It was also new and trailblazy. So anyway, that's all just to say that I understand why Space Quest 1, for example, would have a thinner plot than Space Quest 4. But
Right.
now I'm trying to on the fly think, like, do any of them have a complex plot? Like 5 has a very clear plot, and there is like a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of a rivalry with Captain Quirk, or whatever the douchey guy is, and there's the primordial soup. There's like corruption, I guess, if you really wanted to make it sound grandiose. They're trying to corrupt people with this stew and things like that. But I guess in King's Quest 4, there's a lot happening. I don't know if that entails for a complex plot or not. I don't know. What do you think? Like, without, I guess, super overthinking it, does Space Quest scream like complex plots to you?
Well, I mean, they get more complex as the game goes on. I mean, it's dealing with part of Space Quest is not just the plot and the story, it's almost like watching Roger grow as a protagonist. I mean, it's a controversial series to bring up. I mean, we've discussed it before. There's some continuity issues when you get in later, but like the first game has one sentence of plot, second game 2 sentences, third game 3 sentences. By the time you get to the fifth and sixth game, you kind of have a paragraph of plot at that time.
Right. Well, that's
So
that's an
it's
interesting point,
tricky,
because
right?
Space
Hmm.
Quest 6 has the continuity issues, and I think maybe out of all the Space Quest games, that's the one where the plot gets brought up the most.
It
And it
does.
is in a negative light. It's almost as if, like, as long as you don't mess with the plot, you can let it exist kind of quietly underneath of everything. But if you start changing things, then maybe it becomes more noticeable. I don't know. That might be a stretch.
Like part of it's relying on visual gags. I think Space Quest 6, it's a very intricate, very detailed game. The backgrounds are super intricate and detailed. Flying through the body as if you're on an episode of the Magic School Bus or something. I mean, it's funny. It's sort of relying on humor and yeah, it almost tried to give itself its own contained plot. I think what you said, as long as you look at 6 as its own self-contained game, almost in its entirety, featuring Roger Wilco in like the fan universe too. It's got a bit of a plot. It's maybe even got enough of a plot to hold it together on its own.
Right. Yeah. Well, that brings me to, I guess, the next point, which is it becomes more and more difficult the more you think on this. It's really easy to overthink this, because there's a risk of oversimplifying a plot. Like, let's
Yeah.
take Fate of Atlantis, for example. I think Atlantis is quite a Ow, my balls. Sorry, the cat. Doesn't matter. Fate of Atlantis is there's a lot going on, and it's, I think, if you were to kind of break it down, I would argue it's probably more complex than straightforward. But
Right.
you could also just say that Indiana Jones and his old friend Sophia are in a race with the Nazis to uncover the secrets of Atlantis. So, like,
Right.
there's this risk of taking any game and summarizing it as simply as possible, and then saying it's not complex.
True.
You know
Well,
what I
you
mean? It's
you
like, it's
brought
almost unfair.
you brought up King's Quest 4 and it's like, yeah, you're like, is there even a storyline? How much of a plot is there? And it's like, yeah, it's another one of those like overarching plots. Rosella has to save father, has to save fairy, bad person kingdom, mini marriage, this and that in the middle. So it's like overarching plot, more plot than the third or second or first, but like to take King's Quest 4 and make it into a book, you'd certainly have to add a lot of filler. Maybe we learn a little bit more about the dwarves and the mortgage they hold on their property. And maybe we hear a little bit about the history mine. And maybe we learn that that unicorn is the last of the unicorns on Earth. And we can even go back and find out what happened to the other universes. Like a story like that, you almost want to expand on it because it isn't really all there, so to speak.
Right, right. Which is again for better or worse, because it's like sometimes that's what creates fandom is leaving
Mm-hmm.
things open so that the fans can all come together and drum up ideas and theories and yeah, I guess fan theories. Let's say like that. Sometimes that is the best thing a franchise can do is leave it unexplained. For fellow fans of Blade Runner out there, like leaving it um, unofficially explained so that you can just eternally wonder, and theorize and come up with different ways of selling why the way you think it is the way it truly is and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess that brings maybe more back full circle to it doesn't have to be complex.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so let me pose the question: are adventure games getting more? Are the plots getting more complex as time goes on? Because I think
I
they
don't
are.
know. I
If you
think
look
they're
at
almost relying on the plot to create the story, which should be a positive thing. You take a game like Oxenfree. I don't know if you've played that one, but it's essentially dialogue choices guiding the story. I think Among Us, or I don't know the names of the other ones. There's a few out there where it's like, at what point, like just having dialogue to click through to determine what happens in the game, but because you're learning more about the characters and their intricacy and the psyche behind them to feel for them. And I see a lot of that happening almost in as such. There's no challenge to the game. You're literally spending the whole game learning about the plot, and that's kind of the game. Like, I don't know if you've noticed that.
Right, that's interesting. Yeah, because it's almost if there was a fork in the road, that would be the other direction, like Oxenfree and Firewatch, and
Mm-hmm.
um, even maybe arguably Life is Strange. But yeah, just that's one way, and we'll circle back to the other way in a minute because I want to stay on what you were saying. But then the other direction would be like Wadget Eye, and that's Kathy Rain, Raw Fury, like that side of new of modern adventure games. But yeah, to the ones that you were speaking of. Um, it's interesting the way you framed that, where you said that the plot of the game becomes. Could you say that again for me? Because that was really good. You're like the plot of
Yes.
the game becomes not all that matters, but
It becomes the whole game. Like the dialogue and the plot and the progression is what the game is about. Unfolding the plot and seeing where it's going to go,
like
even is.
Telltale.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Like Telltale, or I don't know, The Long Walk or something. I'm not sure.
Sure, please. Um, I, you should have stuck with three. I don't know what he's talking about. Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, so bringing it to Telltale helps me focus on the point that you're making
Yeah,
because
like
it's
The
like
Walking Dead, even, or something. Like, what is
right.
what is the plot, right? When you're playing it, it is the plot is the progression is the plot is the. It's kind of hard for me to even separate it out, mixed with like timed events, maybe.
Right, the narration is so at the forefront. It's like when the narration, the narrative is the puzzle too. It's like it's all about the
Hmm.
branching dialogues. It's yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't think about this at all coming in to record this because yeah, Walking Dead, all the Telltale games,
Hmm.
it's all literally about the plot. You almost don't, and yeah, maybe there's an issue with that too. Like careful what you wish for in a sense, because it's like some of the best parts of Space Quest 4 is just like the freedom to explore the world.
Hmm.
Like as and we've talked about this plenty on the podcast before, but like being able to explore like the mall or
Hmm. Yes.
Lighton or Lytton in Police Quest,
Hmm.
that was so like I don't know, that was so crucial to the experience of having the freedom to just casually walk around and not be tethered to the story at all times, and like everything you do matters. It's like whoa, take that easy too, and so yeah, that's interesting. It's like it is quite a balance going on here, and it seems
Yep.
like erring on the side of less plot is at least safer, right? With
Hmm.
like omitting opinions from this. because it would just be an opinion for me to pick a side. I think it's fair to say that it's definitely safer, or like the numbers, the statistics are on the side of less plot for an adventure
Hmm.
game, which is so, it's again, it's very weird. It's really
It
strange.
is. Well, okay. Let's just head into territory of the Phantom Fellows, because a plot, you say it 100 times in the episode, but we've said it to each other. Like, I looked it up in our chat just to see. We say it a lot, and like, okay, in the Phantom Fellows, you've done this idea of there being an overarching plot that maybe goes through 1, 2, 3 games, and then you've got your mini stories, because it's kind of like in chapters, right? And that's another way to do an overarching story and mini stories, with, because like a chapter is a bunch of little scenes. Each scene has its own little story, so you've got like mini stories within your chapter. You've got your chapter within your story, because you've got a cohesive storyline from number one beginning to number one end, but then there's that openness to continue on it. So that is another like larger overarching. So if you're thinking about it like you're in English class and you've got all these like parentheses over top of things, you've got your overarching, you've got your one game arc, you've got each chapter arc, and then you've got like each scene and each scenario, and then every conversation. So like plot, it's a lot. It's almost overwhelming when I start putting it all together.
But yeah, just picturing like when they map out like flight charts, like of all the airplanes in the sky, and you just see like thousands of these little lines connecting everywhere.
Hmm.
That's kind of the visual. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's an interesting angle. Without making it, let's say, about Phantom Fellows, I can say that from the outside, I noticed a lack of plot in Dark Side Detective,
Hmm.
which I was obviously influenced by. Um, quite a lot, as far as at least in the early days of Phantom Fellows, and I think I started developing my own, I don't know, ground to stand on, I guess. But in the very beginning, a lot of it was like, how could I do that specifically better? And I noticed that, and not better in a pretentious way, just better in a, like, if you don't, you got to aim as high as you could possibly aim if you want to do something good. I think is an um, isn't like a loaded comment to make, right? Where it's like, of course we got to aim high and try and be the best.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean that it'll land there, but that should be the aim, I think. And anyway, that to be said is that I noticed that there was a lack of an overarching plot, and that it made things feel. And this isn't to critique Darkseid, but just to say, just to, I guess, better help clarify or sculpt out where do plots stand, at least for me, in opinion and taste, where it's like, I noticed it did two things. Well, one, it was just the fact that I noticed that there wasn't an overarching plot, and it was just,
Hmm.
this is the next case that the Dark Side guys are on, and that was really fun. But it was also a bit single serving, where it was just like,
Hmm.
take it or leave it. Like when I finished a case, the only reason to do the next case is because I was having fun, which is totally a great and a valid reason. And they did an amazing job of making it fun and making it so I wanted to go to the next case. But there wasn't anything I was going to miss if I didn't. Like
Oh, that's it. That's right there. You're not worried if you're going to miss something if you don't do something. That, I think, is the key. Actually, really, really well said.
good. Thank God. we're we're coming up on the hour mark and finally got something that sticks. Because yeah, okay. So staying with that, it would be like having yeah, and maybe that comes back to movies or films or things like that. But it's like, and maybe it's funny because I really like the Family Guy, but maybe this is why, for the many people that don't like it, it's like I could see the Family Guy lacks that as well. It's more of just like, like a slice of dessert. Like, here, just have some cheap laughs. Doesn't matter. Um,
Hmm.
and in that sense, it's like, so yeah, there's times and places for all that stuff. I shouldn't muddy things up by bringing that into it, but yeah, back to the idea with the Phantom Hills and looking at Darkseid and being like, yeah, but it's missing an overarching plot. So what does the overarching plot mean to me? Um,
Hmm.
and but it wasn't just like the reason to continue on. It was also character development, I guess.
Hmm.
It was also like wanting to know a little bit more about them, and without those elements, it was like, oh, I'm never gonna know more about them though. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's not on the menu for this specific franchise or whatever, which is fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
And as we
Mm-hmm.
said previously, that can be a good thing. That can leave it so where the audience gets to decide, their backstory and theorize about it. But at the risk of that not happening, I don't know. Yeah, then it is more just kind of empty.
Well, you're filling it out, right? Like in your game, you've got your main characters, you provide a little backstory, you provide context. And like, okay, for me personally, I can see development over time, and not even so much as the characters developing. I feel they kind of are who they are, but they connect and they're real, and they have these little like moments, these like real moments that's not just like off the top comedy. And to me, that's really important to me in a good game. I want you to hit me on both sides. I want you to make me laugh. I want you to show me something that I didn't know before. I want you to make me think, and then I don't want to think. And then like I want everything. I want it all. And kind of I feel that's what I'm getting with the Phantom Fellows is just a little touch of everything. You're making me laugh. You're making me go, you're making me go, oh, like, wow, I hadn't thought about that. You're making me like go to Google and be like, what does that word mean? But like in a good way.
No, that's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so I guess the plot in that sense adds complexity because it's
Hmm.
like you said, the two characters are who they are in a not in a banal way, but in a consistent way. Like you
Hmm.
want a consistent character that's not wildly changing, which isn't easy because I feel like I've wildly changed in the last 3 years, but I still have to keep things more or less the way that they always were. But it's like I look at it as um, maybe later in the game you'll catch a glimpse as to why they do this one thing that they do. Like
Hmm.
why do they have this little certain type of ribbing that they do, and it's like you could maybe later on you could visit as to why. Or a better example for listeners would be like for one of the days in the game, day 5, I decided to make Engelbert, to make the ghost in a bit of a bad mood, just like a
Hmm.
little bit grumpy, a little bit sour that day. Because one, that's just how it is. Like some days we're just in a grumpy mood, but then two, it gave me the opportunity at least to explore that side of being dead. Like this does suck though.
Hmm.
Like, but for
Hmm.
real jokes aside, like I'm stuck on Earth as a ghost, and like sometimes it really bums me out.
Hmm.
So it was a nice opportunity to explore two things to make it feel more real, like in a sense. So if you're spending a week with these two characters, one of them is going to have a bad day at some point during that week, and then the other to just to show some vulnerabilities. And if these two are like really good dude friends, there's probably a lot of ball breaking and stuff like that going on, but like it's an opportunity to stop and be like, hey, but they do really care about each other too. And like all jokes aside, if somebody falls, like they're gonna help each other get back up. So yeah, I guess
Yeah.
plot can bring complexity to that. And
You
yeah.
totally blew my mind a second ago. I think I've just realized something. I think, like, in part, at least for games, especially made by indie developers, plot is guided by how much the person who makes the game cares about each individual element. Much do you care about the environment? How much do you care about the characters as a whole? How much do you care about each character and who they are? How much have you developed those characters yourself? And how do you share that with the audience? And is that the part of the game that you care about? Like maybe you're all about the ambiance and the pacing, or like all of that. Like I didn't even clue in. Of course it's totally all guided by you or whoever it is that's making the game, and where your priorities are, and where you think that they need to be for us players to enjoy.
Right, right. Yeah, that helps to articulate it for me as well. Like, I mean, so many times where it's like we go along doing things and don't even really know why. So that helps me understand that too, because it's like at this point we're almost at 3 years in development. At some point a year and a half ago, halfway through, I realized what a big game this was and was going to be. And then it's like, well, okay, well now I don't want it to just be jokes. Like now
Hmm.
now if it's gonna be like an experience, I want it to be like the full experience. It's touch on different actual emotions and things like that, and maybe get some life experience things plugged into it or whatever the case is. But yeah, that's
Hmm.
kind of interesting.
Yeah, because
um
that's your voice. I mean, that's anything an author in any way outputs to the world. You're either trying to share, like oftentimes, I think you're trying to share with the world something you've gained, so that maybe after they experience it, they can have gained something out of it too. And maybe it's out of your own life experience. Maybe they can relate it in their experience. Maybe you want them to see your vision. Maybe you want them to have their own vision, because, art obviously can be interpreted differently by everybody, but it's so much an individual journey.
Right. Yeah. No, that's well said. It's very well said. I think a
Hmm.
lot of times it just starts off as an opportunity to write different jokes, and then it turns
Hmm.
into something more complex. Because it's like, like the grumpy thing off the bat was just like, it was just a fresh angle for that day, let's say, where it's like, okay, well, instead of just continue, we're on day 5 now, so instead of the 5th day of the same, let's just change this little aspect up, and then we get a whole different realm of jokes. But then then you realize, like, there's a lot more here than just different kinds of jokes. You can
Hmm.
actually, like, finally start to touch on what it's like to be dead, like, joking aside, like, this is a real person who by now in the game, hopefully they're somewhat invested in or interested in, and it'd be nice to see more than just like that plastic exterior persona of like the
Yeah.
jokey sidekick guy, and actually like explore that. So that's kind of fun.
That's kind
um
of, I guess, a good reason to release all the chapters at once. I mean, some would say, okay, well, if your game is 6, 7, 8 chapters, well, then just release a chapter at a time. But, like, okay, to me, I lose. I mean, I often can lose a little bit of my investment in a game if it's chopped up in that way, especially in very specific individual points. So I really like the fact that it's a whole game. It's one game. It's all one game, but it is divided up so that I can comfortably, stop, absorb, and be ready for the next adventure.
right. No, I appreciate you saying that too, because yeah, that's been something I've been tempted to regret, which was doing it this way. Is like one solid, especially for the length of it, because I think it's going to end up being over, probably over a 12-hour experience to play
I
it.
was going to say about
um
14 hours is what I was just saying to James yesterday, about,
yeah,
give or
right,
take.
yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds about fair, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's in a sense too. There's like some Gabriel Knight lessons learned too, as far as
Hmm.
sins of the father, because that's based on 7 days, and
Yeah.
and I'd say this that Gabriel Knight's a little more loyal to the one subject matter, because each day it's more about expanding the singular investigation. Whereas where
True.
Phantom Fellows, it's like it's 7 different days, 7 different investigations. In a sense, I mean, really, if I was to be super nerdy about it, it's 6 different investigations, and the 7th day is reserved um, to bring together the overarching subplot that's been happening. Where so like
Hmm.
the subplots starts stirring up in the 3rd day, and then the 4th day, and the 5th day, and the 6th day, and then the 7th day. It's like, okay, it's time to deal with this now. It's time to
Yeah.
really give this the attention that it's deserved and answer the questions that it's been asking, and stuff like
Hmm.
that. But regardless, I think the overall idea is like to offer something new each day,
Yeah.
and then at the end tie it all together in a sense that it almost reminds me of like like my previous job, which was doing musical scores, where it's like sometimes you'll have like this brooding kind of bass line, or it's something that you introduce subtly a few minutes in or a few days in, and then you let it build, and then you let it build, and then it comes to a point where it has to crescendo, and
Hmm.
it demands the attention at that point, where it's like, okay, let's stop and deal with this. And also, musically speaking, usually it's that line or that new melody that keeps people interested all the way through. So it's like the
Hmm.
subplot of the story. Hopefully, it's like I said, it starts kicking up in day 3, and you get little teasers and little tastes, and maybe a little bit more in day 5 than in day 6. But regardless, like it's around and it's in the
Hmm.
air, sort of idea, and that should hopefully keep the interest. Where it's like, okay, I do almost need to know how the fuck this ends now. What is
Yeah.
going on with this with this side plot story.
Yeah, like
Um,
it's going to bug you if you can't finish it for whatever reason. You want somebody to be thinking about it and going, "Oh man, but what is going to happen?" And
right,
then,
right.
that's something you're looking for, that invested curiosity that, some games are able to do really quickly in a very short amount of time without a lot of plot, but not so much. Like, I'm not eternally invested in Alexander from King's Quest. I don't think about what he's doing all the time. But, like, Rosella has a little bit more plot, and I do kind of think about her a little bit. I even thought maybe she was a bit misrepresented in King's Quest 7 as far as her personality went, but I cared enough about her to think that. Like, that's kind
Right.
of a big deal.
Right. That's a really good point. So I guess a fair recap would be that it's the environment and, well, the two things that we didn't expect so much would have been the environment and
Yeah.
the characters.
What about the
As far as,
music? Does music affect plot or how you view it? I mean, it's intrinsic in gameplay. A game without music would be terrible, but does it have anything to do with plot at all?
I don't know. I'm about to start doing the music for my game, so I've been it's something I've been thinking about a lot, and I'm on the other side of it right now. Like right now, I'm almost nihilistically thinking that music doesn't matter nearly as much as, well, let's just say as much as it does in films.
Hmm.
It just it I don't and it's just like, I don't know. I'm almost hesitant to say because it's like it's just like thought experiment stuff where I haven't picked a hill to die on with this yet at all
Hmm.
for everybody listening, but the more, because I'm like trying to do like a little bit of homework right now where I'm listening to games that have like revered scores, and I'm just trying to see where it all settles in. Like, when did the music make a difference, and what kind of music was it, and was it more prominent than others? And there's way
Hmm.
less of a rhyme or reason with video game music than there is with movie scores. Way
Yeah.
less. And it's to the point where it's actually quite frustrating as far as research is concerned, because there's just
Hmm.
like these wild hits and misses where they'll be like, oh, so and so killed it with this score, it's absolutely amazing, and then you listen to it and you're just like, yeah, okay, like it's this is fine. Like, I would
Hmm.
notice if it wasn't there, but like, yeah, with video games, with adventure games, I'm having a very hard time pinpointing what the music does, because if there's one lesson I've learned so far in research to score my own game, it's that the silence and the headspace is really important. So it's like all I've really concluded so far is that you need music so that you can not have music and let
Hmm.
that matter. Like, it's the moments in adventure games where the soundtrack stops that
Hmm.
usually grab my attention the most. But those moments wouldn't be powerful if it was always just silent. Like, that's not how that works at all, right? You need the almost constant, yeah, just the constant rattle of music to eventually, when you cut the music, for it to be noticeable. So yeah, I
I
don't
guess
know.
it's positional, right? I mean, music is very like, this is where you are, this is the atmosphere, this is how your main character is feeling, this is how the environment around them is, this is what they're doing. It is, and then you have to like, is the music leading up to a plot point? Or does it make a difference? Because it's like a game soundtrack is usually like 6 or 7 to 12 songs that are played. Each environment kind of has a song. So here's the outdoor song, here's the thunderstorm song, here's the apartment song. Yeah, but it's like, that's, it's environmental more than, I guess, guiding where the game is going. But if in the game you're doing it like a movie, things are getting scary, the music gets quieter and it's like rain, rain, and it's like that's happening, then it's like it's pushing the plot forward to me because it's enhancing what's happening on the screen at that moment instead of just where you are, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. I would say that it's the music in a video game is more is almost purely atmospheric,
Hmm.
whereas in a movie it's both atmospheric and influential over your emotions. And that's
Right.
not to say that a score in a video game can't like influence your emotions, and it can, and it does, and it should, but because you can't predict, because of player predictability,
Mm.
you more have to, and because of the just simple video game logic things, like a piece of music has to loop, would be an
Right.
example. It's like there's all these limitations that are baked in to a video game. Where it's like you don't know how long a player is going to be in this area, so it has to loop.
Hmm. That's a
Um,
good point.
there's so many factors like that to where the music in the games, like I'm thinking of Thimbleweed Park in my head right now, because that's a 20-hour game potentially on the hard mode, the full mode, 16 to 22 hours. There's 12 songs on the soundtrack. It
Hmm.
One of them is the intro, one of them's that jukebox song. So it's like it's only 9 or 10 songs that play for 20
Cool
hours.
Sneakers is the best one.
Right, that's the one I'm talking about. Where it's
Do
like
do do do
th-
do do
that
do
one
do
doesn't. It doesn't even count
do.
because you gotta
I
let it
love that
finish.
one.
Um, that one doesn't even count, right? The intro doesn't count because it's played once, and that one doesn't count because it's a gimmicky,
It's a
plays
gimmick.
the no quarter song. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an absolute gimmick. It's not part of the atmosphere. It's not part of. You hear it that
No
one
quarters,
time,
right.
or
Thank you.
yeah, you
Sorry.
only hear it when you mess with the machine. So
Yeah.
it's like all that to say is that now we've got 9 songs that have to span 20 hours, and
Yeah.
it does it flawlessly. I still, the fact that I still like the music says it all. Like, how could you still like after hearing those 9 songs for 20 hours? If you still like it, that means that Stephen Kirk or whoever did it. Well, specifically was him with that, but whoever in any game did a good job if you still like it after 20 hours of hearing 9 songs.
It's
But yeah,
true.
all that to say is like you can't. Whoever's scoring a film is much more akin to like a puppet master. You can really play with people's emotions. You can nudge them where you want them to be and make them feel more or less how you want them to feel, and
Hmm.
control that throughout every single moment of the score. Like the peaks and valleys and the highs and lows, and the suspense and the drama, the silence. You control all of that to a T perfectly. Whereas with a game, it's like, well, I don't know where the fuck they're going to be at this moment. So like, you can pick when it goes totally silent, and that's about it.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it's
That's
got a
true.
loop. So yeah, that's interesting. But so I guess really super long answer short is no. I don't think it does. I don't think it affects the plot. I don't think it
No,
can.
no. I like that. I think I'm agreeing with you, especially after hearing you talk about it. So it just brings me back to, I think we have to do another episode eventually on music soundtracks. I know we've touched on it, I think, briefly in the past, but we're going to have to do it. We're
Yep.
going to have to insert some clips because as we're talking, so many different music soundtracks are flying through my head for so many different games, completely irrelevant to this episode. So,
Yeah, no, we definitely do it, and especially doing research like to score Phantom Fellows and like paying extra. I'm definitely gonna have a lot more to say than ever before.
mhm.
Yeah, as far as how to do that, and
So I guess I kind of want to recap over everything that we've talked about here and talk about like in your opinion, like have you even changed your opinion? Do you think that a strong plot is a game changer? I mean, cuz I almost feel after we've been talking about it that like you said earlier, a strong plot at least for you and I right here might even be a detriment to an immersive gameplay experience in an adventure game. You really have to work super hard at finding a balance between plot, environment, location, excitement, enticement, investment. There's a lot of different aspects.
yeah, no, God, that's such a good point. Because right away I think of like Unavowed, and I think of Techno Babylon, Gemini
Hmm.
Rue. Basically, I'm thinking of Wajidai games right now, and how
Yeah.
they're all quite complex, and they all pull it off, if not miraculously. They pull it off
Hmm.
because they're really, really well done.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, like Technocrat, who designed Techno Babylon. I can't think of his real name. He's a super nice guy too. But it doesn't matter. Like these are like passion, like love letter, passion projects, whatever. Like you know, something these people may have worked on for years, or like it makes me think too of like Fifth Element, where Luc Besson, who wrote and directed that movie, like he wrote that movie. He started writing that movie in like middle school, to
Yeah.
where the alien language that Mila Jovovich speaks in that, or Lilu speaks, is literally its own made up language, because he's been like, that's how much of him is that movie, right? Like he'd been writing that movie all his life. And there's certain games that are like that, like Techno Babylon, right, where it's like the lore and the things that go into it. It's like it's somebody's legacy, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
You're
Um,
feeling the heart. Dave Gilbert does it in his games for sure. And when
yeah.
you play it with the commentary, you're like, oh my God, there's meaning behind like not just the location, but every picture on the wall or like the reference to this character sitting on the chair over there. There is passion and heart all the way through his games. And in Techno Babylon, it's the same way. In a lot of Francisco's games, you see it too, or Golden Wake or something that has like a complexity to it,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that a lot of that just comes from you, the creator. If you're complex, you're making a complex game, and it's going to come through that way, especially now that like we have the technological abilities to do that. I mean, we're not discovering the forefront of gaming with like adventure and like Pong. Like we are well beyond that point to have the ability to put whatever it is we want from ourselves into the games. So it's about like time and connection and passion and willingness, and what part of the game you're passionate about, and how the player is going to connect with it, because nobody's passively taking in what you're giving them. As a game creator, you have to go into my mind. Like all game creators need to go into the player's mind and be like, yeah, I understand the passion and all the things I want to put into that, but what are they going to get out of it, and are they going to want it? So it's really, it's complicated, and plot is the thread that weaves through like every facet of it.
It is. It's since we're coming to the end of the episode, it's almost a miracle in itself that I have no further conclusions. Like I haven't gotten any closer to like a definitive statement to make because if I look at how complex Gabriel Knight is, one or two, which are they're extremely complex to the point where they're weaving in real historical events, and oftentimes those events are altered slightly, which just furthers the complexity of it. And I look at how masterful those games are, and like how I literally look up to them as far as like writing games is concerned, or just telling stories in general is concerned.
Mhm.
Um, but then I look at the other side, like I think my two favorite Sierra things, at least excluding all the quests, would be Lara and Gabriel, and
Mhm.
and Lara Bow's games are not very complex. I mean, I haven't really stopped to think too much about Colonel's Bequest right now, so forgive me if I'm like just really overlooking that and I just sounded stupid. But looking at Dagger of Amon Ra, um, it's not very complex. It's there's a murderer loose in a museum, and he's killing everybody. And when you I'm not going to spoil the game, but it's like when you find out the who and the why, it's not like it's more just like okay,
Oh yeah, okay, that
yeah,
makes sense. Yeah.
right,
Okay.
yeah, like okay, I could see that. I mean, she seemed pretty mad for what it was, but okay, some people are crazy. Um, so all that to say is that like Dagger of Amon Ra is an awesome game, and it's a lot of fun, and you're unraveling this mystery one murder at a time, and it's fun and it's exciting and it's engaging, but it's not a complex plot. It's just a murder's
Mm-mm.
happening at a museum, and ultimately the person behind it all, yeah, and like there's I don't want to spoil anything, but like they try to, I guess they add a little bit of complexity when it comes to like the the cult part of it or whatever, the occult part of it. Um, but yeah, it's nothing too crazy, let's just say. So I guess I'm really just trying to say that okay, just one more example, and this is I'm more if I'm sounding wildly all over the place, it's kind of on purpose because that's what's making my point here, which I will wrap up. But it's the last one I want to bring into it is Willie Beamish, because
Mhm.
Willie Beamish is actually like kind of oddly complex for a story, and I think if anything, I just wanted to get this conveyed in this episode. So maybe I'm shoehorning it in, I don't know, but there's a lot going on with Willie Beamish, like between his ghost grandfather. Um, just like childhood
The
happening,
dynamics. Hmm.
the dynamics between him and both sisters, what's going on between husband and wife, the husband losing his job, Leona coming into town and taking over, and then hiring the dad, and it's oddly complex is the best
It's
way to
like a
put it.
Saturday morning cartoon to me. That plays off like a two-parter Saturday morning cartoon. You'd watch it on two different Saturdays, and it would be able to tell the same story that that whole game did, but because it's just a cartoon, it tells it in two 25-minute episodes.
Yeah, and well,
But
I
it's
think it,
enough to make two 25-minute episodes because it actually has a story, because you couldn't make two 25-minute episodes out of the early King's Quest games. There's no way.
right, and I would probably take your olive branch and just stretch it a little bit further into like 90 minutes. Let's say 88 minutes, and bam, now we're talking like Disney movie length, or I don't know why I said Disney, but just it's with your logic that you just laid out. It's not a big stretch to be like it's borderline. A movie, like a classic, especially the early '90s, like 85-minute runtime, where you can keep and hold attention, like considering it's Willie Beamish, like if you really break down the plot of that game and what's going on, it almost has no business being as complex as it is. Like even the introduction of Turbo Frog and like his foreign owner and like or the Japanese tourists. Like there's a lot of facets to that game that are more complex than probably. I don't want to like say something stupid and make anybody mad, but it's like everybody listening knows how much I love Space Quest, and I would say that Willie Beamish might be more complex than any of the Space Quest games. Like as far as like the story that's happening and all the different onion-like layers that are unfolding. Doesn't matter whether that's here nor there, but my point is like you've got a game like Willie Beamish, which doesn't seem complex, but if you really break it down, it's quite complex. And then you've got Gabriel Knight, which is, I think, unarguably complex. And then you've got Dagger Bomb on Ra, which is quite straightforward. And it's all just to say that they're all equally enjoyable. And I like them all the same.
I'm going to take this
and
opportunity.
And to your starting point from this rant would be that being having a complex plot, I think, is a risk. It's a risk to take because I think it can make the game better, but you got to really pull it off, or else you risk overwhelming them. And as you touched on earlier with Techno Babylon, we both love that game, and people can listen to our episode on that and hear that that's a genuine sentiment that we both came out of that with glowing reviews saying buy it. I played it twice, and I could see myself playing it a third time in 10 years. But the point being is that game came really close to blowing it. And I think we expressed this in other words in our episode about it, because we were both just starting to feel the weight of the lore, where it's like, whew, this is a lot. Like by the end of the game, I was like, oh, am I going to be able to keep up with this? Because it's starting. There were moments where it was just almost losing me a little bit, where it was just like, I think a lot of it was fatigue, where I'd been playing the game for hours and there was just more lore, and it came really close to blowing it, and it didn't. And it's an amazing game. But I think that highlights my point that you're almost at a risk when you bring in complexity like that, because if anything, it can talk you out of a fun time. Okay, so that's my point. You know, that whole
the whole thing that you
thing
just said there, that there was no obvious cut into, because that's
right,
fine.
I think there's like lights are on in the house now. We have no continuity here. So anyway, now that I've finished my point, what's your point? What's your final thoughts on this?
Well, when we first started talking about this, I thought that plot was important. And as games got more complicated, their plot would progress and inherently would make a better game on the surface of it. And the deeper we've gone into it, the more I realize there is a balance to a plot. And a lot of it is it's gameplay, it's environment, it's the adventure itself, it's the plot, it's the characters, it's the depth to which the person creating the game is interested in the backstory and the plot. That it's so much more complicated than I thought it would be. But like plot is intrinsically a part of everything that I like to play. So like it's important, but it's not absolutely detrimental if it's not overwhelming. I like the first thing I said about Gabriel Knight was, wow, this is deep. This is a really interesting game. There are so many layers upon layers upon layers upon layers, and it stuck with me. It impressed me, and it did help me like the game more. But then like when I play a game like Willie, which it also has a plot, and maybe it's a thinner plot, but it's a pretty complicated plot. You don't even think of it as an overarching story, but it's not, Willie Beamish isn't like a whole bunch of mini games in the same way. It's a whole continuous story all the way through, and it's not chunked up. So I guess in my wordy way, all around it is there's a balance. You want some plot, not too much plot. You want the right amount of plot for the right amount of game in the right situation. And I don't know that games nowadays are going in the direction that I prefer in all cases. I really want to have that mix of interactivity, plot, and engagement, and then that little bit of distance where I'm not overwhelmed by story. I mean, that's not asking for much, right?
Right. No, that's good. It's because that helps me. That helps me articulate to myself in the sense that it's similar to soundtracks in that the role of a plot is different in a video game than it is a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really glad that earlier you brought up Telltale, because for me personally, that there is such thing as too much plot, because I'm not huge into that style of adventure game like The Walking Dead and Wolf Among Us. You know, I tried them, and it was missing as you just said, the world exploration.
Hmm.
It was missing that part of it. It was too, you know. So you can go too much plot or too little plot, and like as you said, it is a balance. So
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
think
I
we
want to do
all
some
find
clicking
something.
and more than, sorry. Just, yeah, I want to do clicking and not just on dialogue choices. So maybe having an overwhelming amount of dialogue doesn't necessarily translate into a fantastic plot.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's a good ending, because that helps me again with the soundtrack thing. It really is how like the idea of a soundtrack and the idea of a plot are
Hmm.
universal. You would think, but if you apply it to a movie or to a game, they completely change. Like their
Hmm.
role, what's expected of them, how they affect things, and their importance. Because as it turns out, even for a narrative-based genre, the
Hmm.
plot is not that important. Strummer, please.
No, but the music is super important because, again, if you're watching a movie for an hour and a half, you're not hearing more than an hour and a half of movie. I mean, that's it. That's your music. That's the movie. It's over. But in a game, plot related or not, you have to hear that music for 20 hours, 25 hours, 30 hours. You don't even know, right? So, anyways, off divergent, but God, it's all so intrinsically connected. It's almost hard to pull all the ideas apart sometimes.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Well, that's our bloody show. I'm gonna say some things, and then Anna's gonna say the normal things. So we're testing this video thing out. We don't know if we're gonna stick with it or not. We would like you to help us decide that. So we're on YouTube. Um, I'll That'll be linked in the episode thingy, where we always link stuff on the podcast. That'll be links. If you guys don't mind, head to YouTube and subscribe. And that'll be, I think we're just going to use that right now as like a loose gauge to see if you guys are interested in this video format or not. um, Regardless of the direction that we go, whether we keep doing video or not, we're going to keep releasing an audio version as a podcast no matter what. So the podcast itself isn't going anywhere. We're just looking to offer the video option. Um, so yeah, let us know what you think about it, whether that's on Facebook or on YouTube in a comment section, or just wherever you can say stuff towards us, including email. Let us know if this is something that you guys are interested in or not. Because Anna and I were both just talking about it. Like I don't know, like I have podcasts that I listen to that are just podcasts for MotoGP stuff, and that's good enough for me. But I think I do prefer video when it's an option. But at the same time, like everybody's just like shoving content down all of our throats all the time. So maybe it's like you just want to take a pass on this video wise, and that's cool too. Because yeah, anyway, let us know what you think. Main thing to take away from my little spiel here is to go to YouTube and subscribe to us. And
Yep.
if we see like a bunch of views on our videos or subscribers going up or whatever, then we'll know that it's being received well. And
Mhm.
also, thank you so much, Brian, for writing us. Brian, I just wanted to say really quickly that I swear to God, I brought up Quest for Glory 4 on the Geek podcast episode regarding Halloween. It's just that I brought it up in the sense where I said to Geek, I'm like, if I don't mention Quest for Glory 4, then we're gonna get in trouble because people love that game and it's got a very spooky looking title screen as far as I know. And then I ended up cutting it, even though I was the one that was like, "We're gonna get yelled at if I don't cut this." Yelled at in a playful way. But I said it to Geek, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't quest for glory either." And I was like, "Ah." And
I
it was
needed
just
to
like
be there, but I was so
yeah.
busy in Germany. You understand. I'd had those tickets for weeks.
Exactly. Anna was just scratching an itch in Germany, and she wasn't there to talk about Quest for Glory 4. But Brian, I promise we did, and we cut it. That's kind of worth nothing though. Um,
Hmm.
but mostly to say is to thank you for writing as always,
Hmm.
Sturmer. Please. And also to check out Death Defying Brian's music because it's so damn good. So if you like synthwave vaporwave, you're missing out if you're not listening to it. And also, we want to say thank you to Retro Floppy, who is our new Patreon.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you to Retro Floppy. Thank you as well to Robin Spark, who's continued to send us fantastic emails. Thank you to Michael Council, because you're in the extra special thanks tier. And you already said Brian Manout, Death Defying extra special thanks tier. Thank you so much for being a part of what makes things keep running. So yeah, jump out there and see if you can find us in even more places than before. But if not, come find us on Twitter. Of course, you can find us at CGG Podcast, and you can talk to Paul at the Phantom Fellows. Wishlist the game while we're talking about the Phantom Fellows. That's on Steam. You can look up information on thephantomfellows.com and send us your words. Mail at classicgamersguild.com. We already talked about Patreon, but hey, how do you find it? Well, Classic Gamers Guild on Patreon. So kind of matches with the name there. Talk to us on Facebook. Join the Classic Gamers Guild. We're a page, we're a group. It's a great place where we talk, we do games, we do all sorts of cool stuff. And it's the whole reason this podcast is happening in the first place, which is just a bunch of classic gamers getting together, wanting to talk about classic games. And that's the whole point of everything we're doing here. It's just Paul and I clearly have many, many hours of things to say about classic games. So we're also up on Instagram, CGG Podcast. So all of those places you can find us. Go do it.
So, yeah, I forgot everyone can see me threatening my child now. That's one of the cons to video. So, don't do murder in video.